Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome back, everyone, to Depictions Media Radio. I am your host, Michael Clogs. As we have heard reports from overnight that Russia has, in fact, attacked points in the Ukraine, and the Ukrainian government, before the attack, sent a message to Putin saying that we would like peace, we don't want war, and asking them to back off and find diplomatic ways of solving their differences. The people in the Ukraine were awakened to explosions and the sounds of war happening in their country. Yesterday afternoon, the Secretary General of the United Nations appealed to the United Nations about what was happening between Putin and Zelensky, saying that measures need to be taken to stop Russia from invading, and those messages from the United Nations and Antonio Guterres were ignored, and Vladimir Putin attacked the sovereign country of Ukraine. So let's start off with listening to messages from the United Nations from yesterday and today, and then move forward from there.
I now give the floor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We meet in the face of the most serious global peace and security crisis in recent years, and certainly in my time as Secretary General. Our world is facing a moment of peril. I truly hoped it would not come. The latest developments regarding Ukraine are a cause of grave concern, and they include reports of increased ceasefire violations across the contact line and the real risk of further escalation on the ground. My thoughts are with all those who have already suffered so much death, destruction, and displacement. The history of this conflict is complex, and at least two permanently opposing narratives. I know that their authors will never agree on what happened in the past. But in the present situation, one thing is clear. The decision of the Russian Federation to recognize the so-called independence of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions and the follow-up are violations of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine and inconsistent with the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. And here, in this hallowed hall, I must emphasize that this action is also inconsistent with the landmark resolution adopted by the General Assembly more than half a century ago. I refer to the Declaration on Principles of International Law concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. The so-called Friendly Relations Declaration was adopted during the General Assembly session marking the 25th anniversary of the United Nations. And the Friendly Relations Declaration, which has been cited repeatedly by the International Court of Justice as representing international law, sets out several vital principles that are highly relevant to today's session. In particular, I would note the principle of sovereign equality of states, and the affirmation that the territorial integrity and political independence of the state are inviolable. Other resolutions of the General Assembly are also fully behind the sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Mr. President, the Minsk agreements approved by the Security Council and that I strongly supported from the beginning were surviving in an intensive care unit thanks to a number of life support devices. But now those devices have been disconnected. We must also be concerned about preserving the integrity of peacekeeping. The United Nations has a long and recognized experience deploying peacekeeping operations which only take place with the consent of the host country. Mr. President, it's time for restraint, reason, and de-escalation. There is no place for actions and statements that would take this dangerous situation over the abyss. It's time to establish a ceasefire and return to the path of dialogue and negotiations to save the people in Ukraine and beyond from the scourge of war. I urge all parties to make full use of Article 33 of the Charter and its diverse instruments of pacific settlement of disputes. Mr. President, the United Nations system is continuing to support the people in Ukraine through our human rights and humanitarian work. Our human rights monitoring mission has 7 offices throughout the country on both sides of the contact line, documenting civilian casualties, monitoring freedom of movement, and reporting on allegations of human rights violations. Our humanitarian operations are independent of whoever might control the territory where people are living. Even before this latest escalation, 2 million people in Ukraine needed humanitarian assistance. And since the start of 2022 alone, we and our partners have delivered 140 metric tons of life-saving aid across the contact line. Here again, our actions are based entirely on humanitarian principles endorsed by the General Assembly. United Nations humanitarian assistance is guided by 4 humanitarian principles: humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. And these priorities are central to establishing and maintaining access to affected people, including those in the context of an armed conflict. The General Assembly has repeatedly underscored the importance of promoting and respecting these principles within the framework of humanitarian assistance. Our humanitarian agencies are committing to staying and delivering to support the people in Ukraine, and are ready to readjust and reprioritize their operations as necessary. As we sadly know all too well, in conflict, civilians, including women and children, always suffer first and suffer most. If the conflict in Ukraine expands, the world could see a scale and severity of need unseen for many years. I urge all sides to allow safe and unimpeded access by humanitarian agencies, including in non-government controlled areas of eastern Ukraine. All parties must uphold their obligations and the international humanitarian law. Mr. President, I'm fully committed to support all efforts to resolve this crisis without further bloodshed. My good offices remain available. We cannot and will not relent in the search for a peaceful solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, I want to reaffirm what I expressed this morning in the meeting of the General Assembly. But of course, it wouldn't make any sense to bother you reading again the same text that I'm sure you are all aware of. In between, during the day, a number of events took place, and with your permission, Mr. President, I would like to ask Ms. Rosemary Di Carlo to be able to brief you on those events. But simultaneously, the day was full of rumors and indications that an offensive against Ukraine was imminent. imminent. In the recent past, there were several situations with similar indications, similar rumors. And I never believed in them, convinced that nothing serious would happen. I was wrong. And I would like not to be wrong again today. So, if indeed an operation is being prepared, I have only one thing to say from the bottom of my heart. President Putin, stop your troops from attacking the Ukraine. Give peace a chance. Too many people have already died. Thank you, Mr. President.
Good afternoon. Russia has attacked Ukraine. This is a brutal act of war. Our thoughts are with the brave people of Ukraine. Sadly, what we have warned against for months has come to pass. Despite all calls on Russia to change course and tireless efforts to seek a diplomatic solution, peace on our continent has been shattered. We now have war in Europe on a scale and of a type we thought belonged to history. We have just finished a meeting of the North Atlantic Council to discuss the situation. The Council also addressed the request by Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia to hold urgent consultations under Article 4 of the Washington Treaty. This is a grave moment for the security of Europe. Russia's unjustified and unprovoked attack on Ukraine is putting countless innocent lives at risk. With air and missile attacks, ground forces and special forces from multiple directions, targeting military infrastructure and major urban centers. This is a deliberate, cold-blooded, and long-planned invasion. Despite its litany of lies, denials, and disinformation, the Kremlin's intentions are clear for the world to see. Russia's leaders bear full responsibility for their reckless actions and the lives lost. NATO allies condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine in the strongest possible terms. It is a blatant violation of international law, an act of aggression against a sovereign, independent and peaceful country, and a serious threat to Euro-Atlantic security. We call on Russia to immediately cease its military action, withdraw its forces from Ukraine, and choose diplomacy. We fully support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and Ukraine's right to self-defense. Russia is using force to try to rewrite history and deny Ukraine its free and independent path. NATO's core task is to protect and defend all allies. There must be no room for miscalculation or misunderstanding. An attack on one will be regarded as an attack on all. This is our collective security guarantee. Today, the North Atlantic Council decided to activate our defense plans at the request of our top military commander, General Todd Walters. This is a prudent and defensive step to protect and shield allied nations during this crisis. And it will enable us to deploy capabilities and forces, including the NATO response force, to where they are needed. In response to Russia's massive military buildup, we have already strengthened our collective defense on land, at sea, and in the air. In the last weeks, allies from North America and Europe have deployed thousands or more troops to the eastern part of the alliance and placed more on standby. We have over 100 jets at high alert protecting our airspace, and more than 120 allied ships at sea from the high north to the Mediterranean. All this shows that our collective defense commitment, Article 5, is ironclad. We will continue to do whatever is necessary to shield the alliance from aggression. I have called a virtual summit of NATO leaders tomorrow to address the way forward. Russia is now facing severe costs and consequences imposed by the whole international community. The Kremlin's aim is to re-establish its sphere of influence, rip up the global rules that have kept us all safe for decades, and subvert the values that we hold dear. This is the new normal for our security. Peace cannot be taken for granted. Freedom and democracy are contested by authoritarian regimes, and strategic competition is on the rise. We must respond with renewed resolve and even stronger unity. North America and Europe together in NATO. We are an alliance of 30 democracies standing as one. We will protect our people and our values. Democracy will always prevail over autocracy. Freedom will always prevail over oppression. And then I'm ready to take your questions.
We'll go to Interfax Ukraine. Thank you, Anna. Interfax Ukraine, Irina Sommer. Secretary General, we all know that NATO will not fight for Ukraine. But don't you think it's time for NATO to build anti-Putin coalition? Thank you.
NATO stands in solidarity with Ukraine, and NATO allies are imposing severe costs on Russia for the reckless invasion of Ukraine. NATO allies, in close coordination with the European Union and other partners all over the world, are now imposing severe economic sanctions on Russia to demonstrate that we follow up on what we said, and that is that it will be a high price for Russia to pay. NATO allies have also over a long period of time provided support, practical support, military support to Ukraine, and helped them to build a much stronger, much better equipped, much better trained armed force today than the Ukraine had in 2014. And I would like to recognize the professionalism and the bravery of the Ukrainian men and women in uniform who are now standing up against the Russian invasion. So we continue to stand together, condemning the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and allies stand together also in sending a message that we will never accept the brutal violation of international law that we see taking place as Russia now invades Ukraine.
We'll go to Bloomberg.
Do you have any information that shows that NATO allies face a direct threat from Russia at the moment? And would NATO reconsider military intervention in Ukraine? Thank you.
So NATO is the strongest alliance in history. And make no mistake, we will defend and protect every ally against any attack and every inch of NATO territory. And that's the reason also we have increased our presence in the eastern part of the alliance with thousands of more troops, ships and planes over the last weeks. To send a very clear message that an attack on one ally will trigger the response from the whole alliance. And we do so not to provoke a conflict, but to prevent the conflict. What we do is defensive, it's prudent, it's measured, but it is necessary because we see the aggressive actions of Russia against Ukraine, and therefore allies also have to make sure that there is no room for any misunderstanding about that Russia can do anything like that against a NATO allied country.
National Public Radio.
Hi, thank you. Terry Schultz with NPR and DW. Mr. Secretary General, in the NAC statement, you say that we're deploying additional defensive land and air forces to the eastern part of the alliance, additional maritime assets, and increase the readiness of forces. Is this now, today, more forces being sent as a result of the fact that the invasion has now happened, or are you there referring to what has already been done as reinforcements? I understand SECOR will now have the ability to assemble the VJTF without coming back to the NAC for approval? And finally, are you still willing to sit down with President Putin or other representatives of the Russian government after this, or are you suspending your offer to hold talks on other issues and the NATO-Russia Council? Thank you.
This invasion doesn't come as a surprise. We have warned against it for months. And sadly, what happened this morning during the night was something that Allied security and intelligence services have predicted for a long time. We have tried to prevent it by calling Russia to engage in diplomatic efforts, by telling Russia that there will be severe costs, economic sanctions, if they invade Ukraine further. But what happened over the last hours, what has happened over the last hours, demonstrate that Russia, despite our diplomatic efforts and despite our clear messages of economic sanctions, decided to once again invade Ukraine. But since we have been warning against this for a long period of time, we have also taken prudent measures to prepare ourselves. And that's the reason why we, over the last months and weeks, have significantly increased the presence of NATO troops in the eastern part of the alliance. More land troops, ground forces, but also air and naval forces. In the coming days and weeks, there will come even more. So we will further increase, and we are increasing our presence in the eastern part of the alliance. And today we activated NATO's defense plans that gives our military commanders more authority to move forces and to deploy forces when needed. And of course this could also be elements of the NATO response force. So we are ready, we are adjusting our posture, but what we do is defensive, is measured, and we don't seek confrontation. We want to prevent the conflict and any attack against any NATO allied country.
And for talks?
Shortly after 4 o'clock this morning, I spoke to President Zelensky of Ukraine as the first missiles struck his beautiful and innocent country and its brave people, and I assured him of the unwavering support of the United Kingdom. Yeah. And I can tell the House that at this stage, Ukrainians are offering a fierce defense of their families and their country. And I know that every honourable member will share my admiration for their resolve. Earlier today, President Putin delivered another televised address and offered the absurd pretext that he sought the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. In fact, he is hurling the might of his military machine against a free and peaceful neighbour in breach of his own explicit pledge and every principle of civilized behaviour between states, spurning the best efforts of this country and our allies to avoid bloodshed. For this, Putin will stand condemned in the eyes of the world and of history. He will never be able to cleanse the blood of Ukraine from his hands. And although the UK and our allies tried every avenue for diplomacy until the final hour, I'm driven to conclude that Putin was always determined to attack his neighbour, no matter what we did. Now we see him for what he is, a blood-stained aggressor who believes in imperial conquest. I am proud that Britain did everything within our power to help Ukraine prepare for this onslaught, and we will do our utmost to offer more help as our brave friends defend their homeland. Our embassy took the precaution on 18th of February of relocating from Kiev to the city of Lviv in western Ukraine, where our ambassador Melinda Simmons continues to work with the Ukrainian authorities and to support British nationals. Now we have a clear mission, diplomatically, politically, economically, and eventually militarily. This hideous and barbarous venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure. At the G7 meeting this afternoon, we agreed to work in unity to maximize the economic price that Putin will pay for his aggression. And this must include ending Europe's collective dependence on Russian oil and gas. That has served to empower Putin for too long, so I welcomed again Chancellor Scholz's excellent decision to halt the certification of Nord Stream 2. Mr. Speaker, countries that together comprise about half the world economy are now engaged in maximizing pressure, economic pressure, on one that makes up a mere 2%. For our part today, the UK is announcing the largest and most severe package of economic sanctions that Russia has ever seen. With new financial measures, we're taking new powers to target Russian finance, in addition to the banks we've already sanctioned this week. Today, in concert with the United States, we are imposing a full asset freeze on VTB. More broadly, these powers will enable us totally to exclude Russian banks from the UK financial system, which is of course by far the largest in Europe, stopping them from accessing sterling and clearing payments through the UK. And with around half of Russia's trade currently in US dollars and sterling, I'm pleased to tell the House that the United States is taking similar measures. These powers will also enable us to ban Russian state and private companies from raising funds in the UK, banning dealing with their securities and making loans to them. We will limit the amount of money that Russian nationals will be able to deposit in their UK bank accounts, and sanctions will also be applied to Belarus for its role in the assault on Ukraine. Overall, we'll be imposing asset freezes on more than 100 new entities and individuals, on top of the hundreds that we've already announced. This includes all the major manufacturers that support Putin's war machine. Furthermore, we are also banning Aeroflot from the UK. Next, on top of these financial measures and in full concert with the United States and the EU, we will introduce new trade restrictions and stringent export controls similar to those that they in the US are implementing. We will bring forward new legislation to ban the export of all dual-use items to Russia, including a range of high-end and critical technological equipment and components in sectors including electronics, telecommunications, and aerospace. Legislation to implement this will be laid early next week. These trade sanctions will constrain Russia's military, industrial, and technological capabilities for years to come. We're bringing forward measures on unexplained wealth orders from the Economic Crime Bill to be introduced before the House rises for Easter. And we will set out further detail before Easter on the range of policies to be included in the full bill in the next session, including on reforms to Companies House and a register of overseas property ownership. We will set up a new dedicated kleptocracy cell in the National Crime Agency to target sanctions evasion and corrupt Russian assets hidden in the UK, and that means oligarchs in London will have nowhere to hide. And Mr. Speaker, I know that this House will have great interest in the potential of cutting Russia out from SWIFT. And I can confirm, as I've always said, that nothing is off the table. But for all these measures to be successful, it is vital that we have the unity of our partners, the unity in the G7 and other fora. And, Mr. Speaker, Russian investors are already delivering their verdict on the wisdom of Putin's actions. And so far today, Russian stocks are down by as much as 45%, wiping $250 billion from their value in the biggest one-day decline on record. Sberbank, Russia's biggest lender, is down by as much as 45%, and Gazprom down by as much as 39%, while the ruble has plummeted to record lows against the dollar. We will continue on a remorseless mission to squeeze Russia from the global economy piece by piece, day by day, and week by week. And we will, of course, use Britain's position in every international forum to condemn the onslaught against Ukraine, and we will counter the Kremlin's blizzard of lies and disinformation by telling the truth about Putin's war of choice and his war of aggression. And we will work with our allies on the urgent need to protect other European countries that are not members of NATO and who could become targets of Putin's playbook of subversion and aggression. And we will resist any creeping temptation to accept what Putin is doing today as a fait accompli. There can be no creeping normalization, not now, not in the months to come, not in the years ahead. We must strengthen NATO's defenses still further. And so today I called for a meeting of NATO leaders, which will take place tomorrow, and I will be convening the countries that contribute to the Joint Expeditionary Force, which is led by the United Kingdom and comprises both NATO and non-NATO members. Last Saturday, I warned that this invasion would have global economic consequences, and this morning the oil price has risen strongly. The government will do everything possible to safeguard our own people from the repercussions for the cost of living. And of course we stand ready to protect our country from any threats, including in cyberspace. Above all, the House will realize the hard and heavy truth that we now live in a continent where an expansionist power, deploying one of the world's most formidable military machines, is trying to redraw the map of Europe in blood and conquer an independent state by force of arms. And it's vital for the safety of every nation that Putin's squalid venture should ultimately fail and be seen to fail. However long it takes, that will be the steadfast and unflinching goal of the United Kingdom. I hope of every member of this House and every one of our great allies, certain that together we have the power and the will to defend the cause of peace and justice as we have always done. And I say to the people of Russia again, whose president has just authorized an onslaught against a fellow Slavic people, I cannot believe that this horror is being done in your name, or that you really want the pariah status that these actions will bring to the Putin regime. And to our Ukrainian friends, in this moment of agony, I say that we are with you and we are on your side. Your right to choose your own destiny is a right that the United Kingdom and our allies will always defend, and in that spirit I join you in saying Slava Ukraini, and I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Sorry to keep you waiting. Good afternoon. The Russian military has begun a brutal assault on the people of Ukraine. without provocation, without justification, without necessity. This is a premeditated attack. Vladimir Putin has been planning this for months, as we've been saying all along. He moved more than 175,000 troops, military equipment and positions along the Ukrainian border. He moved blood supplies into position and built a field hospital, which tells you all you need to know about his intentions all along. He rejected every good faith effort the United States and our allies and partners made to address our mutual security concerns through dialogue to avoid needless conflict and avert human suffering. For weeks, we have been warning that this would happen. And now, it's unfolding largely as we predicted. In the past week, we've seen shelling increase in the Donbass, the region in eastern Ukraine controlled by Russian-backed separatists. The Russian government has perpetrated cyber attacks against Ukraine. We saw a staged political theater in Moscow, outlandish and baseless claims that Ukraine was about to invade and launch a war against Russia, that Ukraine was prepared to use chemical weapons, that Ukraine committed a genocide. Without any evidence, we saw a flagrant violation of international law in attempting to unilaterally create two new so-called republics on sovereign Ukrainian territory. And at the very moment that the United Nations Security Council was meeting to stand up for Ukraine's sovereignty, to stave off invasion, Putin declared his war. Within moments, missile strikes began to fall on historic cities across Ukraine. Then came the air raids, followed by tanks and troops rolling in. We've been transparent with the world. We've shared declassified evidence about Russia's plans and cyber attacks and false pretexts so that there could be no confusion or cover-up about what Putin was doing. Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences. Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia. This is going to impose severe cost on the Russian economy, both immediately and over time. We have purposely designed these sanctions to maximize the long-term impact on Russia and to minimize the impact on the United States and our allies. And I want to be clear, the United States is not doing this alone. For months, we've been building a coalition of partners representing well more than half the global economy. 27 members of the European Union, including France, Germany, Italy, as well as the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and many others, to amplify the joint impact of our response. I just spoke with the G7 leaders this morning, and we're in full and total agreement. We will limit Russia's ability to do business in dollars, euros, pounds, and yen to be part of the global economy. We'll limit their ability to do that. We're going to stunt the ability to finance and grow the Russian military. We're going to impose and we're going to impair their ability to compete in high-tech 21st century economy. We've already seen the impact of our actions on Russia's currency and the ruble, which early today hit its weakest level ever in history. The Russian stock market plunged today. The Russian government borrowing rate spiked by over 15%. In today's actions, we've now sanctioned Russian banks that together hold around $1 trillion in assets. We've cut off Russia's largest bank, a bank that holds more than 1/3 of Russia's banking assets by itself, cut it off from the U.S. financial system. And today, we're also blocking 4 more major banks. That means every asset they have in America will be frozen. This includes VTB, the second largest bank in Russia, which has $250 billion in assets. As promised, we're also adding the names to the list of Russian elites and their family members that were sanctioned as well. As I said on Tuesday, these are people who personally gain from the Kremlin's policies, and they should share in the pain. We will keep up this drumbeat of those designations against corrupt billionaires in the days ahead. On Tuesday, we stopped the Russian government from raising money from U.S. or European investors. Now we're going to apply the same restrictions to Russia's largest state-owned enterprises, companies with assets that exceed $1.4 trillion. Some of the most powerful impacts of our actions will come over time as we squeeze Russia's access to finances and technology for strategic sectors of its economy and degrade its industrial capacity for years to come. Between our actions and those of our allies and partners, we estimate that we'll cut off more than half of Russia's high-tech imports. It will strike a blow to their ability to continue to modernize their military. It will degrade their aerospace industry, including their space program. It will hurt their ability to build ships, reducing their ability to compete economically. And it will be a major hit to Putin's long-term strategic ambitions. And we're preparing to do more. In addition to the economic penalties we're imposing, we're also taking steps to defend our NATO allies, particularly in the East. Tomorrow, NATO will convene a summit. We'll be there to bring together the leaders of 30 allied nations and close partners to affirm our solidarity and to map out the next steps we will take to further strengthen all aspects of our NATO alliance. Although we provided over $650 million in defensive assistance to Ukraine just this last year, let me say it again. Our forces are not and will not be engaged in the conflict with Russia in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight in Ukraine, but to defend our NATO allies and reassure those allies in the East. As I made crystal clear, the United States will defend every inch of NATO territory with the full force of American power. And the good news is, NATO is more united and more determined than ever. There is no doubt that the United States and every NATO ally will meet our Article 5 commitments, which says that an attack on one is an attack on all. Over the past few weeks, I ordered thousands of additional forces to Germany and Poland as part of our commitment to NATO. On Tuesday, in response to Russia's aggressive action, including its troop presence in Belarus and the Black Sea, I've authorized the deployment of ground and air forces already stationed in Europe to NATO's eastern flank allies, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Romania. Our allies have also been stepping up, adding the other allies, the rest of NATO, adding their own forces and capabilities to ensure collective defense. And today, within hours of Russia's unleashing its assault, NATO came together and authorized and activated an activation of response plans. This will enable NATO's high readiness forces to deploy and when and where they are needed to protect our NATO allies on the eastern boundaries of Europe. And now I'm authorizing additional U.S. force capabilities to deploy to Germany as part of NATO's response, including some of the U.S.-based forces that the Department of Defense placed on standby weeks ago. I've also spoken with Defense Secretary Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, about preparations for additional moves should they become necessary to protect our NATO allies and support the greatest military alliance in the history of the world, NATO. As we respond, my administration is using every tool at its disposal to protect American families and businesses from rising prices at the gas pump. We're taking active steps to bring down the cost, and American oil and gas companies should not exploit this moment to hike their prices to raise profits. In our sanctions package, we specifically designed to allow energy payments to continue. We are closely monitoring energy supplies for any disruption. We've been coordinating with major oil producing and consuming countries toward our common interest to secure global energy supplies. We are actively working with countries around the world to elevate collective release from the strategic petroleum reserves of major energy consuming countries. And the United States will release additional barrels of oil as conditions warrant. I know this is hard and that Americans are already hurting. I will do everything in my power to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump. This is critical to me. But this aggression cannot go unanswered. If it did, the consequences for America would be much worse. America stands up to bullies. We stand up for freedom. This is who we are. Let me also repeat the warning I made last week. If Russia pursues cyber attacks against our companies, our critical infrastructure, we are prepared to respond. For months, we've been working closely with the private sector to harden our cyber defenses, sharpen our ability to respond to Russian cyber attacks as well. I spoke last night to President Zelensky of Ukraine, and I assured him that the United States, together with our allies and partners in Europe, will support the Ukrainian people as they defend their country. We'll provide humanitarian relief to ease their suffering. In the early days of this conflict, Russian propaganda outlets will keep trying to hide the truth and claim success for its military operation against a made-up threat. But history has shown, time and again, how swift gains in territory eventually give way to grinding occupations, acts of mass civil disobedience, and strategic dead ends. The next few weeks and months will be hard on the people of Ukraine. Putin has unleashed a great pain on them, but the Ukrainian people have known 30 years of independence, and they have repeatedly shown that they will not tolerate anyone who tries to take their country backwards. This is a dangerous moment for all of Europe, for the freedom around the world. Putin has committed an assault on the very principles that uphold the global peace. But now, the entire world sees clearly what Putin and his Kremlin allies are really all about. This was never about a genuine security concerns on their part. It was always about naked aggression, about Putin's desire for empire by any means necessary, by bullying Russia's neighbors through coercion and corruption, by changing borders by force, and ultimately by choosing a war without a cause. Putin's actions betray his sinister vision for the future of our world, one where nations take what they want by force. But it is a vision that the United States and freedom-loving nations everywhere will oppose with every tool of our considerable power. The United States and our allies and partners will emerge from this stronger, more united, more determined, and more purposeful. And Putin's aggression against Ukraine will end up costing Russia dearly, economically and strategically. We will make sure of that. Putin will be a pariah on the international stage. Any nation that countenances Russia's naked aggression against Ukraine will be stained by association. When the history of this era is written, Putin's choice to make a totally unjustifiable war on Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger. Liberty, democracy, human dignity, these are the forces far more powerful than fear and oppression. They cannot be extinguished by tyrants like Putin and his armies. They cannot be erased from people's hearts and hopes by any amount of violence and intimidation. They endure. In the contest between democracy and autocracy, between sovereignty and subjugation, make no mistake, freedom will prevail. God bless the people of a free and democratic Ukraine. May God protect our troops.
Bonjour tout le monde, merci d'être ici. Je suis accompagné aujourd'hui de la vice-première ministre Freeland et des ministres Joly et Anand. On est ici aujourd'hui pour parler de la situation en Ukraine. L'attaque injustifiable de la Russie contre l'Ukraine est inacceptable. This morning, Ukrainians woke up to the brutal, terrifying reality of war. President Putin has launched a horrific, unprovoked attack on their country, a sovereign nation, including missile strikes in their capital, Kiev. He has needlessly put the lives of innocent people at risk, violated Russia's international treaties, and launched the greatest threat to European stability since World War II. Canada is unequivocal in our condemnation of Russia's unprovoked and unjustified attack on the sovereign, democratic state of Ukraine. President Putin's brazen disregard for international law, democracy, and human life are a massive threat to security and peace around the world. I just spoke a few minutes ago with President Zelensky. I told him that we are announcing strong action today and continue to stand with him and with the Ukrainian people. Earlier this morning, I met with G7 partners to coordinate our response. We're also working closely with NATO and our allies. Together, we have made clear that Russian violence, aggression, and violation of international law will not go unpunished. We stand united and steadfast in our support of Ukraine's sovereignty, and we stand in solidarity with the Ukrainian people's right to decide their own future in a free and democratic state. Mardi, après la reconnaissance par le président Poutine des soi-disant États indépendants de Donetsk et Luhansk, le Canada a annoncé une première série de sanctions concertées. Les sanctions du Canada ciblent les responsables des actions illégales de la Russie, ainsi que 2 banques russes soutenues par l'État. De plus, on interdit aux Canadiens de faire des achats de la dette souveraine russe. Et il sera interdit de participer à toute transaction financière avec les soi-disant États indépendants de Donetsk et de Luhansk. On a également annoncé le déploiement de jusqu'à 460 membres supplémentaires des forces armées canadiennes pour soutenir l'OTAN sous l'opération Réassurance afin de favoriser la paix et la sécurité en Europe. Today, in light of Russia's reckless and dangerous military strike, we are imposing further severe sanctions. These sanctions will target 58 individuals and entities, including members of the Russian elite and their family members, as well as the Wagner Group and major Russian banks, among others. We will also sanction members of the Russian Security Council, including the Defense Minister, the Finance Minister, and the Justice Minister. In addition, effective immediately, we are ceasing all export permits for Russia and canceling existing permits. These sanctions are wide-reaching. They will impose severe costs on complicit Russian elites, and they will limit President Putin's ability to continue funding this unjustified invasion. Aujourd'hui, suite à la frappe militaire irresponsable et dangereuse de la Russie, on impose d'autres sanctions sévères. Ces sanctions ont une grande portée. Elles vont entraîner de grands coups aux élites russes ayant des liens de complicité et elles vont limiter la capacité du président Poutine à continuer de financer cette invasion injustifiée. Je veux être clair. L'attaque de la Russie contre l'Ukraine est aussi une attaque contre la démocratie, la loi internationale et la liberté. Make no mistake, Russia's attack on Ukraine is also an attack on democracy, on international law, on human rights, and on freedom. Russia's actions stand in direct opposition to the democratic principles that generations of Canadians have fought to protect. Democracies and democratic leaders everywhere must come together to defend these principles and stand firmly against authoritarianism. Russia must immediately cease all hostile actions against Ukraine and withdraw all military and proxy forces from the country. Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected, and the Ukrainian people, like all people, must be free to determine their own future. I want to be clear. Our quarrel is not with the people of Russia. It is with President Putin and Russian leadership that has enabled and supported this further invasion of Ukraine. La vérité, c'est que la Russie viole la souveraineté de l'Ukraine depuis des années. En 2014, elle a annexé illégalement la Crimée. Depuis, elle n'a jamais cessé de nuire à la démocratie en Ukraine. Et aujourd'hui, le président Poutine a ouvert un nouveau chapitre sombre de cette histoire en lançant une invasion à grande échelle. These are deeply disturbing times for the international community and for people everywhere who care about freedom and democracy. And while the eyes of the world are on leaders, we can never lose sight of the human cost of conflict. Innocent people, including children, are now facing violence and chaos. In these dark hours, Canada's message to the people of Ukraine is this: you are not alone. We are standing with you. For Canadians and permanent residents in Ukraine, your safety and security are now our top priority. We also want to make sure that you can get to safety. We've arranged for safe passage for you and your families at the land borders with Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Moldova. We are urgently issuing travel documents for affected Canadians, permanent residents, and their immediate family members. We're also prioritizing immigration applications for Ukrainians who want to come to Canada. And to ensure we can serve people as quickly as possible, today we are launching a new dedicated phone line for anyone at home or abroad with urgent Ukraine-related immigration questions. Aux Canadiens et aux résidents permanents du Canada qui se trouvent en Ukraine, votre santé et votre sécurité sont notre priorité absolue. On a pris des mesures pour que vous et votre famille puissiez traverser en toute sécurité les frontières avec la Pologne, la Slovaquie, la Hongrie, la Roumanie et la Moldavie. On délivre de toute urgence des documents de voyage aux Canadiens et aux résidents permanents touchés, ainsi qu'aux membres de leur famille immédiate. On traite aussi en priorité les demandes d'immigration provenant d'Ukrainiens qui souhaitent venir au Canada. Et pour être certain de pouvoir servir les gens le plus rapidement possible, on lance aujourd'hui une nouvelle ligne téléphonique spécialement conçue pour les gens qui sont ici ou à l'étranger, qui ont d'urgentes questions à poser sur l'immigration en lien avec l'Ukraine. Last night, I spoke with Ukrainian Canadians at the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress board meeting. I told them that President Putin has underestimated the strength and unity of democratic allies and partners, and he has underestimated the strength and resolve of Ukrainian people. These are traits of Ukrainian Canadians, too. You have helped build this country. You are proud of your country, your culture, and your heritage, and you don't back down. Well, neither will Canada. Our support for Ukraine, for democracy, and for human rights remains unwavering. Merci beaucoup. Je passe maintenant la parole à la vice-première ministre Chrystia Freeland.
Merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre, et bon après-midi. Quand nous nous sommes réveillés ce matin, le monde était différent. La Russie a lancé une attaque brutale et non provoquée contre l'Ukraine, un pays de plus de 40 millions d'habitants qui ne demande que la paix et la liberté. Today, we woke up to a changed world. Russia has launched a brutal and unprovoked attack on Ukraine, a country of more than 40 million people who have sought nothing but peace and freedom. The horrific human costs of this cruel invasion are the direct and personal responsibility of Vladimir Putin, who has chosen to invade a sovereign democracy and challenge the rules-based international order. History will judge President Putin as harshly as the world condemns him today. Today, he cements his place in the ranks of the reviled European dictators who caused such carnage in the 20th century. The response by Canada and our allies will be swift, and it will bite. This barbaric attack cannot and will not be allowed to succeed. To my own Ukrainian-Canadian community, let me say this. Now is the time for us to be strong as we support our friends and family in Ukraine. Now is the time for us to remember «Ще не вмерла Україна». И моим друзьям в России я хочу сказать прямо и четко. Наша ссора не с российским народом, а с президентом Путиным и с теми, кто его окружает и поддерживает. С теми, кто сделал кровавый выбор атаковать суверенную демократическую страну. Canada understands what is at stake. We know that the people of Ukraine, in fighting for their lives, for their sovereignty, are fighting for us too. They are fighting for democracy, and we stand with them. Thank you very much. Et je passe maintenant la parole à ma collègue, la ministre des Affaires étrangères, Mélanie Joly.
It is a dark day. Last night, Russia launched an unjustified attack on Ukraine. Over the past several months, we have said that Russia was positioning troops and equipment to invade Ukraine. Russia said that it was not, that there was nothing to worry about. Russia lied. We said that Russian military buildups along the border were continuing to grow. Russia said exercises were complete and it was withdrawing troops. This was a complete fabrication. Russia told us their military exercises in Belarus would end on the 20th of February. Today, Russian forces are invading Ukraine from the territory of Belarus. We said that Russia would fabricate a pretext for military intervention in Ukraine, and Russia has tried to do that repeatedly, although in no way convincingly. Russia argued that the Minsk agreements were to be the only roadmap to peace. This week, Vladimir Putin declared the Minsk process dead. For Russia, this was never any question of a diplomatic, for Russia, there was never any question of a diplomatic solution or an honest conversation about security in Europe. That this was always about Russia taking control over Ukraine's sovereignty. Russia is solely responsible for this crisis. They have chosen deception, intimidation, and a manufactured crisis based on lies and false flag operations. Today, the Russian regime is challenging the world order that has kept us safe since the Second World War. Au cours des derniers mois, nous avons dit que la Russie mettait en place des troupes et des équipements pour envahir l'Ukraine. La Russie a dit que ce n'était pas le cas, qu'il n'avait pas lieu de s'inquiéter. La Russie a menti. Nous avons dit que le renforcement militaire russe le long de la frontière ukrainienne continuait de croître. La Russie a dit qu'elle allait retirer ses troupes. C'était une pure invention. La Russie nous a dit que ses exercices militaires au Bélarus prendraient fin le 20 février. Aujourd'hui, ils envahissent l'Ukraine via le Bélarus. La Russie a affirmé que les accords de Minsk étaient le seul chemin vers la paix. Cette semaine, Vladimir Poutine a explicitement déclaré que le processus de Minsk était mort. La Russie a donc prouvé au monde entier la véritable nature du régime de Vladimir Poutine. Ils sont les seuls responsables de cette crise qu'ils ont créée par la désinformation, la manipulation et la mauvaise foi. Earlier today, I have been in touch with the office of President Zelensky, with the Deputy Prime Minister, Finance Minister, and the Foreign Minister of Ukraine. I have been in touch with many of my G7 counterparts and the Secretary General of NATO. We're united. Canada stands with Ukraine and its people. Alongside our allies and partners, we will ensure Russia's actions do not go unpunished. You have heard the Prime Minister. We will impose a strong package of new sanctions targeting all major banks, oligarchs, member of the National Council, including Minister of Defense Shoigu, Minister of Finance Silvanov, and Minister of Justice Turchenko. Canada will also block exports to Russia that require permits. Existing permits will be canceled and all applications will be denied. No aerospace, technology, and mineral goods will be sent to Russia. Canada has one of the strongest package of sanctions being released today. And together with those from our allies, we're inflicting severe pain on the Russian regime and the Russian economy. We call on Russia to stop its attack immediately and to return to the path of dialogue and diplomacy. This madness has to stop. Comme vous l'avez entendu de la part du Premier ministre, nous imposons des nouvelles sanctions visant toutes les grandes banques russes, les oligarques qui font partie de la garde rapprochée du président Poutine, les membres du Conseil national, notamment le ministre de la Défense, des Finances et de la Justice. Le Canada bloquera également toutes les exportations vers la Russie qui nécessitent des permis. Les permis existants seront annulés et toutes les demandes seront refusées. Aucun bien lié au secteur de l'aérospatial, de la technologie ou encore des minéraux ne pourront être exportés vers la Russie. Le Canada a mis en place l'un des ensembles de sanctions les plus vigoureux et avec ceux de nos alliés, le but est d'affaiblir et d'ébranler le régime russe et son économie. I also spoke again this morning to Canada's ambassador to Ukraine. Our staff are now safely in Poland. As soon as we're able to ensure adequate delivery of services, they will return to Ukraine. Consular services remain available to Canadians in Ukraine. Information on how to reach Global Affairs can be found on our website and on my social media channels. Should there be a surge in demand for consular assistance, we are ready. Our teams in Ottawa, Warsaw, and major European cities are on standby to support. The safety and security of our Canadians is our highest priority. Canadians in Ukraine should shelter in place unless they're able to leave the country safely. I'd like to finish by expressing that I know that the pain we're inflicting on Russia does not compare to that being felt by the Ukrainian people today. You can be assured that Canada and the world is with you. J'aimerais conclure en disant que je comprends que les sanctions que nous imposons à la Russie ne sont pas comparables à la douleur que ressent le peuple ukrainien aujourd'hui. Soyez assurés que le Canada et le monde entier est avec vous aujourd'hui. Merci.
Okay, so we have heard from the leadership of NATO. We have heard from the Secretary General of the United Nations. We heard from Boris Johnson, Joe Biden, and Justin Trudeau with cabinet members about what is happening and what actions will be taken against Russia and how NATO, Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom are going to help the people of Ukraine. As it was stated by one, that while the governments are hashing this out, the human lives that are truly suffering are the people on the ground, just the simple people, those who want to live in peace. They just want to be able to put food on the table, love each other as family members, have a conversation and a coffee with neighbors and friends. Think about the simple things that we do every day that we just simply take for granted. Being able to pick up a telephone and call a friend. Being able to watch a screen, a TV show. Think about the simple things that we take for granted every day because We live in peace. The people of the Ukraine are not in peace, and all of those simple joys that we are enjoying right now, even as you listen to my voice, have been interrupted. So, thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio, and we hope that prayers and actions help those people in Ukraine right now. We hope that they feel the feelings of hope and love that we are sending to them as they stand strong against tyranny. Thank you for listening today, and thank you for supporting us with our sponsors. Please go to depictions.media for more information, and click on our contact link and let us know how we can help. How we can help bring your story and help bring us to a better world. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.